My name is Sakshi, and today we are going to study Cell, the Unit of Life, Class 11. Right? So we have studied this chapter in our junior classes also, and we know a little bit about it. Okay, so before we proceed, I want to let you know that in case of any doubts, just feel free to ask in the comment section. So what do we know about cell? We have studied in the junior classes that it is the basic structural and functional unit of life. We have been studying that if we have to compare a cell, then we compare it with a brick. As a brick to the wall, likewise, a cell is to the living organisms. Okay, so more about it, we will study it now. So let's talk about the discovery first of all. Who discovered the cell? So cell was discovered by Robert Hooke. He is also known as the father of cytology. Here the cyto words means cell, logy means study, right? So he took a cork, a very thin slice of a cork, which is made from a bark of a dead tree, right? And he observed under his microscope. So this was his microscope, as you can see it in the picture. And he observed something like this. The picture is taken from his own book. And this is a honeycomb-like structure. So he discovered he took a very thin slice and he discovered this honeycomb-like structure with a lot of boxes inside and empty boxes, right? So he was very curious to know more about it. And then he started observing more living organisms as well. So when he observed under his microscope the living organisms also, he found out that these boxes in the living organisms were not empty. They were filled with some juice inside, right? So then he coined the term cell, which in Latin means a small room. So he observed that all the living organisms have these small, small rooms inside them, which he coined it as a cell. Now, later on, further more discoveries were going on regarding the cell worldwide. So the scientists, they were very curious to know more about it. So now, here, if you can see in the year 1665, when the Robert Hooke discovered, a lot of discoveries were on. And then in the year 1833, so you can imagine the gap, kitne saalon ke baad, then Robert Brown discovered that there is a circular thing which is present inside the cell. And then he named it as nucleus, right? So there were more scientists who were working on both plants as well as animals. So here, Schleiden and Schwann. Schleiden was a botanist and Schwann was a zoologist. As we know, botanist ka matlab, the one who studies the plants, and zoologist is one who studies the animals, right? So they also observed both plants and animal cells respectively, and they shared their findings with each other. Okay. And then they concluded and came down to a cell theory, which they discovered were the present in both plants as well as animals. Okay. Then in the year 1855, Virchow, who was a German physicist, he discovered that cells do not just come from anywhere. They arise from the pre-existing cell. So जो पहले cells हैं, उन्हीं से rejuvenate होके, उन्हीं से बन के नए cells आते हैं. So then his very famous saying is omnicellular acellular, which means cells arise from the pre-existing cells. Okay, so here are the postulates of the cell theory. What then they penned it down and noted down and then came out with the cell theory, which states that cells are the structural and functional unit of life. कि किसी भी living organism का सबसे छोटा structural और जो independently function करता है, that is a cell. All living organisms are made up of cell, right? All cells arise from pre-existing cell, as we have just discussed, which was given by Virchow. Nucleic acid is the genetic material in all these cells. जैसे कि हम जानते हैं डीएनए है, आरएनए है, deoxyribonucleic acid and ribonucleic acid. These are both the nucleic acid, and that is the genetic material which is present inside the cell. cells or interact with each other, which results in organisms function. So it is a collateral work of all the cells that helps an organism to function. So basic composition of all the cells are more or less same, right? So I hope this was very much clear to you all. In case of any doubt, please let us know in the comment section. Thank you. Okay, so based on the complexity of the cell structure, a cell is divided into two groups, grossly into two groups. So first is prokaryotic cell and the next is eukaryotic. So wherever this term karyotic comes, it means the nucleus. So from here we can come to know that pro means the primitive type of the nucleus is present in these type of cells. So that means the membrane bound cell organelles, they are absent, and it is usually seen in bacteria, archaebacteria, like the primitive organisms, जो छोटे organisms हैं. The eukaryotic cells are those, as we know that karyotic means the nucleus. So ये वो वाले organisms हैं जिनमें definite cell के अंदर cell organelles are membrane bound कि अपने अपनी जगह पर हैं और they perform different functions also. So this is seen in the higher organism like the plants, animal, fungi, and all. Right? Okay, these are the few examples. Here we can see in the picture that the prokaryotic cells, the nuclear material is just openly lying in the cytoplasm. And here it is very well organized between the different compartments. As we can see, all the cell organelles are here according to the different color that is shown in this diagram here. So we can see that all these cell organelles, they are performing their specific functions, right? Now, depending on the size of a size of the cell may vary from very, very micrometers to a few centimeters, right? बहुत ही छोटे, like the smallest one is the mycoplasm. It is a very microscopic cell, which is about 10 micron meters. And the range goes up to ostrich cell, which you might have seen in the diagrams or otherwise also, as in this picture, we can see it. This is the hen egg that we see in our homes and around. And this is the ostrich. So we can clearly see this size difference here. So this is also single cell. So it is the largest cell known to us. And the longest is the human nerve cell, which is shown here in the diagram. As you can see, it's the length of which goes up to 90 centimeters. So you can imagine it is pretty long. And the ostrich egg is so big that it is used for decorative purposes also, as we can clearly see in the pictures here. Okay, now as we are studying the classification of the cell can also be classified on the basis of the shape. Okay, as we can see here in the picture, the different shapes are visible to us. But why do they have different shapes? Because when a cell is present in different organs, so it has to perform the specific functions, right? So that it all depends on the function that the cell perform. The shape is according to that. Like the nerve cell, they have to travel, they send the message from the different part of the body. So that is why it needs a more length, where it can easily, within the fraction of second, it can deliver the message. So that is why it is very long over here, right? A fat cell has to store a lot of fat in it, the adipose cells. So they have to have good storage. That's why the shape is like this. Likewise, the muscle cell, they have to perform the stretching, the relaxing, the extension and compression of the muscles is there. That is why the structure is like this. So it all depends on the shape of the cell, depends on the kind of function that the cell is performing, right? Okay. Also, the next in this category is the unicellular and multicellular organisms. Like from the name, as the name suggests, uni means one, single. So that means this organism is made up of a single cell. Here, a single cell performs all the functions. That means the respiration, the excretion, the digestion, everything is performed by just one cell, which is present in these organisms. Okay, so they are called unicellular organisms. Whereas the multicellular means multi means many. So that means the division of labor is here. So the more and more the more and more cells are present in these organisms, they perform these specific functions. Here we will talk about the unicellular organisms first of all. So we know about amoeba, chlamydomonas, and bacteria, paramecium, etc. We've been studying about it in our junior classes also. We know that the amoeba in amoeba, the locomotion, the digestion, the ingestion is all performed by this single cell, right? So the organism constitutes of only one cell in which all the life processes is performed by this one only, the single cell. Whereas in multicellular organism, as we spoke about it earlier as well, the division of labor takes place. Like the storage part is shown over here in the fat cell. So जैसे कि आप हम ये काम कर लेते हैं, आप वो काम कर लीजिए, digestion का काम कोई और कर लेगा, respiration का कोई और कर लेगा. इस हिसाब से there is a division of labor in the multicellular organism that help an organism to function well. So these are the roles of these cells. Now, classification on the basis of the nucleus. We have spoken about it. We will talk about it later in our classes. Now, the classification, we have spoken about the shape, the size, if the single cell is present or the multiple cells are present. We have done that. Now we come to the type of nucleus. Okay, what kind of nucleus is present in the cell? So depending on that, there are two type of cells. One is the eukaryotic and the other is the prokaryotic. Wherever this term karyot comes, it means the nucleus. Okay, so from the name, as the name suggests over here, pro means the primitive type. So here in the prokaryotic organisms, the nucleus is a primitive type of nucleus. That means there is no well-defined nucleus present, no nucleoid is just very, very primitive. It is lying in the open. There is no special demarcations, no special categorization is done inside this. Whereas when we talk about the eukaryotic cells, that means a very well-defined nucleus is present, nucleus, nucleolus, and the entire genetic material which is there in the nucleus. It is very well organized in these kind of cells. We will talk about this more. Okay, so the membrane-bound cell organelles are present here, as we have spoken earlier also. Look at these. So these are, like suppose these are the different organelles. So they are present in their own boundaries, right? Inside the cells. So the membrane-bound nucleus is also present. We can clearly see from this diagram, the nucleus is over here, and there is a boundary also in that, and there here we can see the genetic material. So genetic material is very well organized here. This is seen in these kingdom, Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. So that so we can say that it is present in the higher organisms. The primitive, the smaller unicellular organisms, it is absent or they show prokaryotic type of cells. Now we will talk about the various cell organelles that are present inside a cell. So as we have discussed earlier also, there is a proper division of labor. The specific roles are performed by each cell organelles which are inside the cell. So the cell is able to live and perform all its function because of these organelles. Like we will talk about it all in details now. The nucleus, the ribosome, rough endoplasmic reticulum, smooth endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, cytoskeleton, mitochondria, vacuole, lysosome, centriole, and cell membrane. So these are all this is how a single cell survives by itself because of these organelles, and they have their specific roles to play in its life. Okay, so we will talk about the plasma membrane first of all, or it is also called as the cell membrane. It is a thin and delicate outermost covering of the cell. As you can see in the diagram over here, ये जो पतली सी outer line आपको दिखाई दे रही है, जो demark कर रही है एक cell को, उसको shape दे रही है basically. This is the plasma membrane or the cell membrane. It ensures the protection of the cell. How come the protection of the cell? कि इसके अंदर ही सब सामान जो सारी ऑर्गेनेलीज हैं वो इसके अंदर ही हैं और ये उसको आउटसाइड एनवायरनमेंट से प्रोटेक्ट भी कर रहे हैं. इट इज सिलेक्टिवली परमिएबल मेम्ब्रेन. सिलेक्टिवली परमिएबल का मतलब कि ऐसा नहीं है कि देयर इज कुछ भी सामान बाहर से अंदर आ सकता है और अंदर से बाहर जाता सकता है. तो दैट मीन्स इफ इट वुड हैव बीन completely permeable to all the stuff, then the organelles would have just flown out of the cell. So that is not the case. Only selectively permeable means some substances only can enter, like water and the nutrients that is required to the cell, they can only enter, rest cannot, right? So this is how it protects also the inside organelles and the nucleus and the genetic material inside. Okay, so now अब हमें पता है कि ये सिलेक्टिवली परमिएबल है, पर इसमें से exchange of substances can happen. But what are the two ways in which it can happen? It can happen by a diffusion or the process of osmosis. अब diffusion क्या होता है? Diffusion is a gaseous exchange between the cell as well as its external environment. So whatever the gases that it want to take in or release out, the excrete out or respire out, whatever the gaseous exchange, it is done by the diffusion. Okay, so from the area of higher concentration to the lower concentration, right? So the gases that move from higher concentration to low concentration. You can relate diffusion at home also कि जैसे incense sticks, suppose कहीं एक जगह आपके घर में जली हैं या किसी ने परफ्यूम स्प्रे किया है in one of the corners in the room, then you can smell the aroma and the fragrance in the other areas also. That means from that higher concentration, the air molecule have spread to the other part which were at the lower concentration, and this process is called diffusion. So the air molecules, wherever the concentration was more, it get diffused to the lower areas where the concentration was less. This is diffusion. This we can see it in and around us also, just to understand it better. Now, the other process is osmosis. Osmosis is for the water exchange that happens within the cell with its external environment, right? So, ये water exchange के लिए there has to be a semi-permeable membrane. अब water तो ऐसे नहीं चला जाता कि high concentration है और low है और चलो इस कमरे से उस कमरे में निकल जाएगा, ऐसा नहीं है. तो इसके लिए हम डेली एग्जाम्पल क्या देंगे? We can give the example of raisins. If you soak raisins overnight, then what happens? The concentration of water is more outside. So then what happens? The water gets imbibed inside the raisins. That is by the process of osmosis, in which a semi-permeable membrane is there. So there is a membrane also. Likewise, it happens in the cells also. From the area of this higher concentration, as we can see it, it moves to the lower concentration, and this process is called osmosis. So the exchange of material from cell and its surrounding, it's seen by both these processes, by diffusion as well as osmosis. Okay, so likewise, जैसे हम देखेंगे अभी about the if the cell is kept in the different solutions. Okay, so how it behaves with the different solution. So first of all, we will talk about hypotonic solution. Hypo means the water concentration in the solution is higher than the inside of the cell. So cell के अंदर concentration कम है और बाहर उसकी ज़्यादा है. So we know कि it always moves from the area of higher concentration to the lower concentration. So what will happen? The water will move inside the cell and cell will start swelling up because of the imbibition of the water. So this happens in the hypotonic solution. In case of hypertonic solution, that means the water concentration in the solution is lesser as compared to that in the cell. अब आपने अपना सेल डाला किसी हाइपरटोनिक सॉल्यूशन में, तो आपके सेल के अंदर वाटर कंसंट्रेशन इज मोर पर बाहर कम है with its external surroundings. So what will happen here? So it will again from the area of higher concentration to lower concentration. In these cases, what is seen that the cell will shrink in its size because उसके अंदर जितना पानी है वो बाहर निकलना शुरू हो जाएगा because of the higher concentration to low concentration movement, right? So cell in this case will shrink. In the hypertonic solution, it will swell, but in hypertonic, it will shrink. Now we come to the isotonic. That means जैसा environment cell के अंदर का है वैसा ही बाहर का है. There is no change at all. So what will happen here? No change. So it will remain as it is. So the cell will not, neither it will swell nor it will shrink. It will remain the way it is. So there will be no change in the cell. Okay, now plasma membrane also show active and passive transport. Transport of what? The materials. The material, the molecules that need to be exchanged with the surrounding. तो सेल के अंदर मूवमेंट्स तो होंगी. अब वो कैसे होंगी? They can be two modes. Now transport can be done by two modes. That is the passive transport. First of all, we will talk about the passive transport. The movement of molecules across the membranes requires no energy from the cell. As we have just discussed about the diffusion and osmosis, the two processes. So इसमें energy requirement तो कुछ नहीं है कि अगर हायर कंसंट्रेशन से लोअर कंसंट्रेशन जा रहा है कुछ भी, तो इट विल जस्ट डिफ्यूज इनटू द एयर, इनटू द गैसेस विल मूव एंड द water will also just move from the higher concentration to lower concentration, right? But the movement occurs along the concentration gradient by diffusion and osmosis. Now, two type of diffusions can take place. One is the simple diffusion. Simple means कि particles directly move across the membrane. Particles अपने आप से high concentration से low concentration, because that is a semi-permeable membrane. That is why the movement across the cell and its surrounding is possible, right? And the one way is the simply it just move. The second way is the facilitated diffusion. Facilitated means कि कोई आपको मदद कर रहा है, कोई आपकी हेल्प कर रहा है, facilitate कर रहा है in order to go ahead with this process. So there are certain transport proteins also present which help the particles move across the membrane, right? So they cannot, so there are some particles which cannot just pass through it, the semi-permeable membrane easily. So they like get carried by these proteins, transport proteins, and then they can pass and through, go ahead in their in the process of transportation. Now, plasma membranes active, and now we have spoken about the passive transport. We will talk about the active transport now. Movement of molecules across membrane requires energy from the cell. As we studied in the passive transport, there was no energy required. The processes were taking on by itself, by the simple diffusion and osmosis process. But in this case, the certain material, they need to be pushed out of the cell or taken in by the cell, for which the energy of the cell is used. So that is why it is called the active transport, because it requires the energy of the cell to carry on its transportation. Movement occurs against the concentration gradient from low to high region. Now, there's a very interesting point. We have studied that normal movement is from the higher concentration to low concentration. But When something needs to be pushed the other way, that means the boat is going the other in the upstream direction, right? So from the area of concentration gradient from low to high, the cell has to have their own energy. अगर अपस्ट्रीम बोट जा रही है तो आपको एक्स्ट्रा पैडल करना पड़ेगा तो आपकी बोट को ऊपर लेके जाने के लिए. Likewise, here also from the area of low concentration to high concentration, the movement requires extra energy. That is why the energy is taken from the cell. Now, carrier protein of cell membrane act as a pump. So these carrier proteins, they carry it and they push these substances out or sometimes maybe in also. ATP, as we know, the energy currency is ATP of the cell, provides the energy input from the cell in this case, right? As we can see it over here in this structure, there are various, these are the proteins mentioned and these cholesterols, and this is the movement is across these. This is the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Okay, so the structure of plasma membrane is made up of lipids, both lipids and proteins, right? It is a lipid bilayer structure. Bilayer means two. So that means there are two layers present in this of lipid. But before we get to know more of this, let's see what is a lipid. So what are lipids? Lipids are the naturally occurring organic substances that are insoluble in water. ऑब्वियसली अगर सेल वॉल सेल मेम्ब्रेन आपकी इनसॉल्युबल नहीं होगी या सॉल्युबल होगी तो इजीली डिसॉल्व हो जाएगा. द एंटायर सेल विल गेट डिसॉल्व इजीली एंड द ऑर्गेनेल्स विल जस्ट फ्लोट आउट and get the cell will get destroyed. So that is why it is made up of lipids which is insoluble in water. And what is the function of these lipids? The energy storage, the cell membrane construction in a sense कि जहां भी कुछ डैमेज है कुछ रिपेयर है तो उसको हील करना उसको कंस्ट्रक्ट करना वापस, that is done by the lipids. Now these are of two types, non-polar and polar. Non-polar is hydrophobic in nature. Phobic means कहीं भी जहां भी वर्ड फोबिक या फोबिया आ रहा है तो उसका मतलब है बीइंग फियर ऑफ और हेट्रेड, राइट? सो हाइड्रो हमें पता है हाइड्रो का मतलब इज वाटर. So non-polar area are the water hatred. They are the hydrophobic areas, and the polar are the hydrophilic, means they like water. So these are the water loving and these are the water hating, water fear. So lipid with hydrophobic and hydrophilic ends, both together in that they are called amphipathic lipids. Okay, so examples over here is the cholesterol and the fatty acids, as we can see over here in the diagrams. So this top over here, this one, the red dots over the top is the hydrophilic head, and the over here the yellow ones we can see is the hydrophobic tails, right? So this is the structure of the cell membrane. Now, plasma membrane's bilipid layer structure. This was given by, it is also called as the fluid mosaic model, right? Which was given by the Singer and Nicholson in the year 1972, right? So, इनका क्या कहना था? They discovered that this cell membrane, it is the protein is embedded in a continuous bilayer of lipids molecule that is termed as the membrane protein. If you see it very carefully in this diagram, this blue ones, these are the proteins, right? They are completely embedded in these bilayer lipid structure. As we discussed earlier also, कि ये red heads और ये yellow tails जो हैं, these are the lipids with their hydrophilic and hydrophobic ends. Right? So ये two layers हैं, as we can see it clearly from this diagram कि ये दो layers में present हैं. That is why it is called a bilayer lipid molecule. Now, integral proteins are those that are partially or completely buried in the membrane, like this one. This is the integral protein. It is completely embedded. दोनों लेयर्स के बीच में है और कंप्लीटली एम्बेडेड है उसमें इन दी लेयर्स. नाउ पेरिफेरल प्रोटीन्स वो होते हैं जो खाली सरफेस पे होते हैं, जैसे ये वाला, ये खाली सरफेस पे है, पूरा अंदर तक नहीं जा रहा है, तो दीज आर द पेरिफेरल प्रोटीन्स. Now, this was all about the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. We have also spoken about this, the fluid mosaic model, which was given by Nicholson and Singer in the year 1972. I hope this much is clear to you. And we proceed now with the next part of it, that is the cell wall. Okay, now we come to the cell wall. It is the layer of the cell which is present in plant cell only. It is not in the animal cells. Why? Because जो plant cells हैं उनको थोड़ी ज्यादा rigidity की जरूरत होती है as compared to the animal cells. That is why the cell wall is present only in plant cell. Now, this cell wall is further categorized into three category: primary cell wall, secondary, and the middle lamella. Right. So first of all, we will talk about the primary cell wall. It is a cell wall of a young plant cell and capable of growth. कि जो young cells हैं plant के, उनके अंदर ये present है और ये grow करती रहती है with time. But जैसे ही cell थोड़ा mature हो जाता है, this primary cell wall gets diminished and it will just diminish and finish, right? And now the secondary cell wall, which is formed by the matured cell. So basically, when the primary cell wall matures, it gives rise to the secondary cell wall. It is located between the cell membrane and the primary cell wall. ये उन दोनों के बीच में होती है. The older cells of the primary cell wall gets converted into the secondary cell wall. It is much thicker and harder. It is composed of cellulose and lignin. Lignin is that substance which gives the rigidity to the cell or to the plant. Now, about the middle lamella. Middle lamella is layered between the two cells. So suppose ये दो cells हैं, उनके बीच में जो layer present है, that is called the middle lamella. It is composed of the calcium pactate and bind adjacent cells together. जो दो साथ साथ के cells हैं, उनके बीच में एक layer है middle lamella और ये इन दोनों को एक साथ bind करने के भी काम आता है. इसके अंदर there are certain small openings also that helps in the exchange of material as well between the two cells. Now, this was about the cell wall, which is present, as we discussed, only in the plant cell. The next one, we are coming to the nucleus. Nucleus is present in both plant as well as animal cells, and it is the area where the genetic material is present. So it is also known as the control center of the cell or the brain of the cell. ठीक है. अब ये होता क्या है न्यूक्लियस? ये जो एक सेल के अंदर प्रेजेंट होता है, इट इज अ स्फेरिकल स्ट्रक्चर विद इन द सेल एंड इट एग्जिस्ट इन डिफरेंट शेप्स एंड साइजेस, राइट. इट हेल्प्स इन रिप्रोडक्शन. रिप्रोडक्शन क्यों? क्योंकि जेनेटिक मटेरियल सारा यहीं पर ही है, क्रोमोसोम्स एंड क्रोमैटिन फाइबर्स इधर ही हैं. So during the time of cell division, these all come together and hence the reproduction, it starts from here only. Now we'll talk about the structure of the nucleus कि क्या क्या present है nucleus के अंदर. As we discussed in the cell membrane, the plasma membrane was present. Here also, this is a special demarcation for the nucleus, which is making it different from the rest of the cell. Hence, there is also a thin nuclear membrane is present, right? उसके अंदर अपना एक न्यूक्लियोप्लाज्म है. न्यूक्लियोप्लाज्म is the fluid which is present inside. There is nucleolus and the chromatin material. Now, nuclear membrane is a double layered covering of a nucleus. दो layers में present है ऐसे. There are two layers present and it is a double layer covering separating materials inside nucleus from the cytoplasm. As we know, in the cytoplasm, there are so many cell organelles are present, but जो न्यूक्लियर मटेरियल उसके अंदर है, न्यूक्लियस के अंदर है, दैट इज डिफरेंट. दैट इज द क्रोमोसोम, द डीएनए, द जेनेटिक मटेरियल विच इज इनसाइड द न्यूक्लियस. अब उसको इस सारे सेल के अंदर जो अदर ऑर्गेनेल्स हैं उनसे सेपरेट रखने का काम कौन करता है? ये न्यूक्लियर मेम्ब्रेन. कि जो न्यूक्लियस के अंदर जो सामान है, इट शुड stay confined within the layers. So that is why this is the nuclear membrane is present, and it separates the material inside from the external environment, which to that is the cytoplasm. Now, nucleoplasm. It is a fluid enclosed by nuclear membrane. It supports chromosome and the nucleolus. जो अंदर, अब it cannot be dry completely. There has to be some fluid. So this fluid inside the nucleus is nucleoplasm. Plasm means the fluid, and nucleo comes from the nucleus. So nucleoplasm is the fluid which is present inside the nucleus. It's it is the act it acts as a site of DNA and RNA synthesis. अब जो डीएनए और आरएनए बनना है, उनकी सिंथेसिस होनी है, it all comes under this nucleoplasm. Now, nucleolus, structure embedded in the nucleoplasm composed of protein and RNA. So this one, it is present inside the nucleoplasm, and it is composed of proteins and RNA. Ribosomes formation takes place here. So this is another point that you can remember. कि nucleolus के अंदर, it is the ribosomes formation that takes place here. Now the chromatin material. Chromatin material are the thin thread-like structure embedded in the nucleoplasm. ऐसे जैसे खुले धागे की तरह, ऐसे chromatin fibers, they are lying inside the nucleus. So at the time of cell division, they come together and take the shape of the chromosomes, right? On which the DNA and RNA, they all are present. Histone and non-histone proteins, they are present. RNA, DNA, they are all inside this chromatin material. Now we come to chromosomes. They are the rod-like structures formed when the chromatin material condenses before the initiation of cell division. Now, it composed of DNA and the nuclear protein. It also contains the information of inheritance. Information of inheritance का मतलब, we know that the characteristics of the offsprings resemble that of their parents. The DNA, the entire information is present over here in the DNA. ये कहाँ पर प्रेजेंट होते हैं? These are present in the chromosomes. But chromosomes ऐसे नहीं होते in the nucleus. They are lying in the open thread-like structure like this. But during the time, or when the cell starts getting ready for the cell division, these chromosomes, they come together and form these rod-like structures, and that bears the DNA. This is held together by the centromeres and kinetochores. They also play an important role in the cell division. Now, on the basis of the nucleus that are present in the cell, the cells can further be classified into uninucleated and multinucleated. Uni का मतलब हमने पहले भी देखा है, uni means one, the single. And as the name suggests over here, uninucleated means the cell with one nucleus, which has only one nucleus. There are no multiple nucleuses present here. Most cells are uninucleated. But in some cases, ऐसा भी देखा गया है कि multiple nucleuses are present. So when there are more than one nucleuses are present, that is called multinucleated cell. And the example for that is the skeletal muscle fiber cell. So it is observed that there are multiple nucleuses present in the skeletal muscle fiber cells, right? And we have discussed this previously also, eukaryotic and prokaryotic. Iska dobara we are going to talk about this here because we are talking about nucleus. Eukaryotic cells are those which have well-defined nucleus, and prokaryotic are those that have primitive type of nucleus. Here we can clearly see the distinguish between these two. Here instead, the cytoplasm, cell membrane, cell wall, nucleus, everything is present. Nucleus is well defined over here, and here we can see the loop or small rings of DNA is just lying like these thread-like structures, they are present. And the membrane-bound cell organelles are present here, whereas in this case it is absent.